Hello. I haven't commented on current events for quite a while, and that's due to a very simple reason. The number of players and arenas has increased so much, and the level of uncertainty has risen so high, that you have to consider an enormous number of possible scenarios. If all the events that were happening were out in the open, then it would be possible to somehow tie your analysis to those events. But they often happen, well, somewhere outside the boundaries of official media. And in this case, any discussion on these topics takes on such an overtly conspiratorial tone that it creates very significant problems. But now, two events have occurred that we can latch onto and talk about in order to understand just how much the world picture has changed. The first of them is purely bureaucratic in nature. This was shown on the internet. I don't know. I haven't watched the news. Maybe they showed it on the news too. A meeting between the Russian Prime Minister Mishustin and, accordingly, the head of Rostek, Khazin. So what's so unexpected about this event? The thing is, from a formal standpoint, Mishustin is, of course, more important because he's the prime minister, he's the second person in the state, and so on. But from the perspective of power theory, that's not the case at all. Because Khazin is the head of one of the largest power groups, as it's commonly said in our political science circles, one of the Kremlin's towers. And Mishustin, generally speaking, despite his formal status as prime minister, has never been considered one of the Kremlin's towers in political science circles. And then, this is purely a matter of bureaucratic protocol. The junior always goes to the senior. If you remember, before this, there hadn't been any meetings between Khazin and Mishustin. There had only been meetings between Khazin and the president. A meeting like this, especially one where Mishustin was clearly taking the lead, indicates that the status of both parties has changed. I won't comment on how they changed, why they changed, and so on. First and foremost, because this is exactly where conspiracy theories start to come out in full force. For now, I'll just say that for any seasoned bureaucrat, such a setup is evidence that extremely serious changes are taking place. It's a kind of proof. The sea is restless, 1. The sea is restless, 2. Remember, in Alexei Tolstoy's book Peter I, there's a moment when Peter I shouts, "Oh, look! A seagull is landing on the sand. There will be a storm." That's a completely typical example. A seagull lands on the sand. There will be a storm. And for this reason, this whole story seems extremely significant to me. The second story is, without a doubt, Wyckoff's visit to Moscow, together with the already practically confirmed meeting between Putin and Trump. There were different versions. One is that Moscow, on its knees, begged Wyckoff for a meeting, which honestly seems rather strange. The other version looks a bit different. I would say the situation here is as follows. The thing is, if we talk about the economic situation in the United States of America, it's clearly heating up there, a lot. And the United States has to solve several issues on multiple fronts. There's the situation in the Middle East. And it's a very complicated situation because war in the Middle East is practically inevitable, but as a result of this war, London wants Israel to cease to exist, and maybe not just Israel. But the United States wants to preserve Israel at any cost. I'm not saying that we are one of the main players in the Middle East today, but in a situation where several major players, namely Great Britain with Turkey joining it, Iran and Israel, and the United States backing Israel, are locked in conflict, it could turn out that our weight might be decisive. I don't rule out that one of the objectives was to ensure some kind of behavior from Russia. The second topic, which is also fundamentally important for the United States of America, is Putin's visit to Beijing. With some potential, well, there's also the SCO summit, with some potential agreements that might be reached there. Again, we can't say which ones, because we don't understand which of them might turn out to be the most painful for the United States of America. It might turn out that, for them, a place that, from the perspective of, let's say, an outside observer, isn't worth a damn, is actually of fundamental importance. This also needs to be figured out as things develop. But the point is, Trump, with his, let's say, outspoken comments on any topic, as well as his constant flip-flopping, has annoyed everyone so much that no words, even from someone as close to him as Witkoff, can be taken seriously. So, roughly speaking, Witkoff shows up and says, "Guys, look here, and can we do it this way, or that way, back and forth?" They reply to him, "Witkoff, everything you're saying is very interesting. We can consider all of this. But tell us, dear, what's the guarantee that when you get back to Washington, your boss won't tell you that everything is completely different?" Witkoff isn't a foolish guy. He understands perfectly well that this is, in general, the case. He says, "And my boss said that he's ready to meet and confirm it himself." In other words, this entire and complete arrangement only truly makes sense in one very specific and singular case. If this crucial meeting is absolutely needed so that Donald Trump himself can personally and unequivocally confirm, in his very own precise words, that the significant things Witkoff extensively talked about are indeed entirely and completely true and accurate. And it's not because anyone thinks that Witkoff is lying to us or to Trump. Because everyone, including Witkoff, understands that if Trump himself hasn't said it on camera, then his words don't mean anything. So, through his own actions, he achieved such an outstanding result. You have to give him credit for that. Ukraine. Someone shouting, "But what about the ceasefire? This and that, blah blah blah." The thing is, if we're talking about some fundamental issues, then you can connect something to that matter. Trump doesn't really care much about Ukraine. This isn't one of those cases where he needs to be really worried. But since his main conflict with the Euro-Atlantic guys is precisely over Ukraine, he might very well, in order to score his own political win with those teams, make some sort of arrangements and agreements with Putin. Well, kind of. And in this situation, when people start confronting him and saying, "Trump, you gave in. Over there in Ukraine, this and that happened," he'll say, "Guys, I didn't give in. I needed this and that in the Middle East, this and that regarding China. And, accordingly, to achieve that result, I had to make some concessions here." Although, in reality, he asked for this himself, because this is the result he needs in order to demonstrate his position to the Euro-Atlanticists. In this case, he won't be fooling us, but, well, I was going to say his own people, but actually, today the Euro-Atlanticists are much more of an enemy to Trump than Russia is. That's the kind of setup we're dealing with. So, in this sense, first of all, Trump's logic of action is more or less clear. And this logic is positive for us. I mean, I don't want to say that we've gained a lot, time will tell, but we certainly haven't lost anything. Next, we'll see how all of this develops. That's why I said that we'll really see the full picture in a week, when the meeting actually takes place and when Trump says his words out loud. And, accordingly, there are serious reasons to believe that there are some very significant economic problems underlying all this. But here, I can only recommend reading the macroeconomic reviews from the Hazel Fund, because in the last two reviews, it's clearly visible. And finally, I want to say that it's not just entrepreneurs and households who need to look at life in a grown-up way. I talked about this in two webinars, which took place on July 30th and August 3rd. But executives of large companies also need to take life seriously. Here, I recommend reaching out to the strategic forecasting agency ARC, because the situation really is, well, tense enough that it's no longer about taking slow and half-hearted measures, but about rushing headlong. Otherwise, you could suffer serious consequences. Thank you for your attention.